Okay, this is class number 24, and it's a class about spirituality. In the last class, we talked about systems thinking. Fritjof Capra talked about spirituality. So I'm going to start out by going back to Aristotle's virtues, because the Greek view of spirituality was living for the sake of something greater than yourself. And so in another week or so, we'll talk about the 12 Olympian gods and how each of them represent one way human beings live for the sake of something greater than themselves. Today, I just want to talk about Aristotle's virtues. And then I want to go over the chapter in Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. He has a book on spirituality. He taught a very popular course, I think at Harvard, on happiness. And of course, he's making an Aristotelian distinction, and I think he even calls it Aristotle at some point. But in this chapter, he calls it spirituality, and he refers to churches, religious groups, as the communities that are founded on cultivating spirituality. He's an atheist, but he still advocates these kind of communities for mental health. And then Robert Lustig, who wrote The Hacking of the American Mind about our food system and how toxic it is. And he also advocates connection, cooking, and spirituality. So after the Enlightenment split science and religion, but systems thinking and people in many, many academic disciplines, after a lot of mistakes, taking the Enlightenment too far and exploiting nature too much and trying to think you could treat the human psyche like silly putty and crank out virtuous people. At the end of all those mistakes, we're back to a very ancient view of the human spirit and raising children to care about something greater than themselves. So I'm just going to briefly go over Aristotle's virtues, and then I will go over these two chapters, and that will be the class for the day. And you can think about your own background. You might have been raised in a formal religious context, but you might also have been just raised as a humanist. I have grandchildren, and some of them, two of them, their parents take them to church, and two of them, their parents don't. But the behaviors are the same virtues that they ask of their children. So it's not a big deal to me. Um, Here. Okay, I picked the wrong one or something. Let me see. Where are we? Aristotle's virtues? No, no. Okay. Word. Okay. Um, all right. So we're not going to do it that way. Do it another way. I'll just take this and I'll blow it up. Um, okay. We can do this. Um, all right. The goal is happiness, activities of soul in accordance with virtue. So a big thing is about how the modern world makes people passive, makes them consumers or observers, or they go online and they get all upset about things they can't control, or they have fantasies and phobias about something that's just in their head. they can't control. It's not their personal experience, and they don't go out and live complete lives. So happiness is going out and being active in the world in many, many ways. And so Aristotle's model, it's a biological model. He says this is how to have a healthy body, mind, spirit, emotional health, social health, political health. So we are a creature who can understand patterns in a world where there are patterns. We're born with the potential to develop these virtues, and we have to activate them. Each virtue is connected to some aspect of human life that everyone experiences to some extent and in some way. And people aren't necessarily conscious that this experience is this kind of an experience. It isn't strictly personal to me. Everybody's had these kinds of experiences. When people realize that, they start to read literature because they realize that could be about me or my friend or my parents or something. And they also, sometimes are motivated to write stories because the story isn't just about me, it's about life. So each virtue is a middle ground between two extremes, too much, too little. Cultures disagree on what the mean is, but every culture has some norm, some expectation of how you deal with these drives and how you take your basic drives, pleasure and fear, your animal drives, and you modify them and become a civilized human being. So every culture has some idea of what it means to be a cultured creature. Um, and then some cultures are better than others because they they establish as a social norm what actually fits with the human nature. For example, a culture that normalizes racism is wrong because there's no reason, no genetic, there's no difference between people of different races in their natural capacities, intellectual or moral. So everyone should be treated the same and be given the same opportunities. Same with sexism and same with environmental destruction. A society that conditions people to destroy nature is self-destructive. I mean, our era is the stakes are high, but it was always true because if people just in small tribes or in nation states would foul their own nest, would destroy their own natural environment, they'd have to declare wars on someone else for resources, or they'd have to migrate. And it would be much better for them if they had not destroyed the natural environment in the first place. Okay, so what are the personal virtues? Self-control in relationship to eating, drinking, and sex. And we know that Mr. Lustig talked quite a bit about eating and drinking especially, but especially eating, how that creates such a physical disruption in our bodies. It makes us moody or less able to relate to other people, less willing to compromise, not get angry. Anyway, so the food system makes a difference, and it's very important that people have healthy food. Courage is the virtue in relation to fear. Fear of pain, death, failure, loss of status, social ostracism, and um, Mr. Lutzig and others have talked about cortisol. He talked about the cortisol system as the fear system. Chronic stress makes people sick. They often eat in order to stay awake or feel less stressed, and then they get obese, and then it gets more stressful. They can't sleep. So it's a terrible downward syndrome. Social media appeals to fear of loss of status, etc. Okay, the fear of death is costing us a lot of money. So we've been through quite a few of these issues. Toxic culture. Generosity is really important because if you give your time and your money to other people, you're acknowledging that we all depend on each other. And not to give time and money means that you have an illusion that you're self-made or that you don't have to depend on other people. It's a lie. We do depend on other people. We are social by nature. So generosity as an expectation is objectively true. It's societies need to reinforce that in order to stay, to preserve themselves and to flourish. Magnanimity is what do the rich people give to? And this is really important because in the US, they're giving more and more to just corporations or political candidates who will then vote to favor corporate interests. So that is not promoting the well-being of the society, and it's really a problem. Also, how they raise their children. If they raise their children to only care about more and more centralization of power and wealth, and then their children inherit their wealth, we will have an oligarchy. We will lose a democracy. And that's true in every society. And it's been true for 2,500 years, and I'm sure long before that. Being even-tempered, not getting too angry, but getting angry enough. Being able to address people if they do something that makes you angry for the right reason in the right way. So it's good to get a situation under control and to do so by expressing your anger in a way that solves the problem, doesn't cause a counter reaction. Rational ambition. You figure out what you enjoy doing that you think can make a contribution to the culture, to the well-being of the society. And then you get the credentials you need in this, the society gives you to give you the right access to the institutions that have experts in that field. And then when you get hired to be an expert, you use it for the benefit of the people who need your expertise. Rational pride is that people go over and above just their social role. So you can be a teacher, but you can also just voluntarily start new after-school programs, or you can be creative about your classroom and have like a poetry slam or a spelling contest, things over and above just every day having the same classes. And they aren't things that your contract says you have to have. You're showing initiative. People do that in every role they play. And it's good. It makes the society much better. And all the social networks that you create that were created for a higher quality of life really add up, and they develop meaningful friendship bonds between people who otherwise wouldn't know each other. Rational humor is you learn how to be serious about life, but also laugh when all the stupid things happen that prevent you from saving the world. We have lots of vulnerability and limitations, but we shouldn't get frustrated, give up. Just say that was silly. That was funny. Rational friendships. Now, there are friendships just based on utility, like my relationship to the grocer, the cashier at the store, or whatever. And I could treat her well, like another human being. But if that's the only capacity I see her in, it's a limited friendship. There are friendships based on pleasure. You don't really respect this person very much, but they're really funny to go out drinking with or to, I don't know, some other leisure time activity that's entertainment. It's not, it doesn't improve the quality of life. But the friendship bonds you have with someone who you want to exercise a certain virtue, somebody you volunteer with, somebody you create a community theater with, or all sorts of things people are creative, or you inspire to, you have a book club and you're going to develop each other's intellectual uh, powers and also empathy powers is if it's novels or if it's about public policy or about history, you develop your capacity, all of them, you develop your capacity to be a citizen. You're a better citizen because you read these books. And if you read them in a book club, you're also creating a social network where everybody in the club can go off and be a better citizen. So you're not just on your own. You put up with minor injustices for the sake of overall social well-being. Truthfulness, you know yourself. You don't underestimate or overestimate your talents, your knowledge, your power. Some people think they're smarter than they are, or they're more virtuous than they are, or they're more powerful than they are. And they just create a lot of problems. The arrogance and the ignorance. Some people are too self-deprecating, like they really have a lot to offer, but they don't have self-confidence. And that costs society a lot too, because society needs everybody to be contributing their virtues and their skills and their knowledge. What are the political virtues? Well, the pleasure that comes from profit, the economic sector, the art of legislation, making laws, distributing wealth, knowing how to allocate resources, rectifying wrongs. Somebody breaks the rules, you know how to punish. Equity as a judge, you know how to apply the laws. And then practical wisdom is you know that the goal of everything you do is human flourishing. And you know how to deliberate about possible choices in a given situation. You can set out all the options that are really possible. And then you make good judgment about which one is best and why. And you can explain it to someone else and you can persuade other people. Other capacities are our ability to create things. Some of those things are what we sell at the marketplace. Some of them are works of art and craft. We should create only products which require the rational use of a natural human capacity. For example, shoes in our society, especially where I live in Minnesota, it's cold. You need shoes. But you can make high-heeled pointed toe shoes, which basically ruin women's feet. And also they can't walk very well on the ice. Or you can, and that makes a lot of money, right? That's a corruption of your skill as a shoemaker. So every skill you have can be corrupted by money, or it can be corrupted by power or fame. You know, you want to be a famous shoemaker. So you have to make all these crazy, outlandish shoes that ruin people's feet, but they make you famous. The intellectual virtues are the ones people associate with formal education and school. These are STEM disciplines, math, science, technology, engineering, and it's important because these skills or the intellectual virtues drive culture and history. So every generation gets more complicated because of the science, math, engineering, technology that's been used to create more products. So, of course, that's why we have the digital age and everything we have. But it can get used for good or bad, which is what we find out with social media. Mark Zuckerberg was an engineer. I've been through that before. So, okay, so this is the situation we have. Now, the next thing, those are the Aristotelian virtues. So my next point is that Mr. Haidt and Mr. Lustig, who um, did not start out life thinking we have to have Aristotle's virtues because uh, they didn't read Aristotle, I'm sure. Aristotle is not read very much in colleges, surprisingly, or only Catholic schools, and it gets associated with the Catholic Church. Usually Aristotle, if it's taught at all, it's at a religiously affiliated school, or if it's taught in a specialized way, and it doesn't really attract students much, and they don't use it as a tool to understand their lives or to live their lives. So Jonathan Haidt is a self-described atheist, but he recognizes the importance of spirituality. So when Mr. Capra says on a systems view that if you think of spirituality as this deep integration of your emotions, your actions, your thoughts, and then the link between your inner life and the universe, if you think of that spirituality as basically physical, mental, emotional, social health, then, there's no gap between science and religion, and especially not between psychology, a healthy psyche. The religious traditions were very adept at figuring out how people could have a healthy psyche in the face of various vulnerabilities and threats. How do they maintain their well-being? Plus, you have to maintain that well-being even to have physical health. So now all these people are rediscovering the insights of ancient traditions, ancient wisdom. So Jonathan Haidt says many cultures, matter of fact, I'd say most cultures except the modern Western world, intellectuals in the modern Western world, or some intellectuals, the academy tends to be so biased toward atheist enlightenment points of view that somebody who's completely succeeded in that system is, says things that seem pretty naive, like many cultures talk about virtuous actions bringing one upward. Well, Mr. Haidt, almost all of them do, especially over history. But anyway, they have this basic distinction between actions that bring one upward, closer to the life of the mind in Greek, and the God as a mind, the unifying force in the universe. Well, base, selfish, disgusting actions bring one downward, right? There is the cave and the light in Plato. There is the high road and the low road in every one of those traditions. Whether or not God exists, people simply do perceive some people, places, actions, and objects to be sacred, pure, and elevating, while other people, places, objects, and actions are disgusting, impure, and degrading. And they know that if you want a healthy culture, people have to act in the ways that are on the high road. There's 6 spiritual practices: meditation, prayer, confession. Atonement means that you make a mistake and you have to recognize you made a mistake You have to confess, and then there's this idea that you're forgiven. You can get back to that original, nurturing, creative, positive part of your psyche, right? It improves people's well-being. It prepares a person to merge with or be open to something beyond yourself. And this is, I think, if you live a spiritual life, things happen to you, and some of them are good and some are bad. But you develop an attitude of, how can I make that into something positive? Or how can I avoid overreacting, right? How can I flush out my immediate impulse to overreact? Um, okay, so, and when you do that, it releases you the oxytocin, love, or serotonin, this long-term contentment and achievement of your goals. But love and achievement of long-term goals are all tied into seeing yourself as a microcosm in the macrocosm, or part of the biosphere, part of the universe, part of the creation. Um, we have we have shared sacredness, like sports is kind of collective joy or sorrow that bonds people together. Um, I have, it's interesting. People learn a lot about life from sports. They can learn, it's a dog eat dog world. It's winner takes all. It's, and then they can learn, well, I would have won except for the ref. Or, I mean, there's so much stuff you can learn. Is it about winning or is it about character building? What is it really about? And then, of course, for some coaches and some players, it's just about winning and that dopamine high, and I'll do anything to get that. And for other people, it's just part of a contented life that you develop. You learn how to get along on a team. You learn a lot about social networking. You learn a lot about teamwork, and you can take those lessons into your career and your family and other aspects of your life. Um, and we will talk about that when we talk about the Olympics. There's powerful collective experiences. So we enter the realm of the sacred together, and church services, um, mosques, mosque services, uh, uh, gosh, for the Jews, their kind of church. It's not a church, it's a synagogue. Synagogue experiences, meditation, Buddhist temples, Hindu temples. There's a sacred space, and there are many symbolic objects like a cross or a mandala that people habitually associate with calming themselves down, thinking of higher things, connecting themselves to the universe. And it is amazing that human beings have developed all of these rituals and belief systems in all different parts of the world, they aren't imitating each other. It was just based on the human condition, figuring out if you want to develop your humanity and you want to have a stable society, and you want your brain to work properly. This is definitely a part of it. It's an important part. You connect with the rhythms of the calendar. You have holidays, feasts. You engage in meditation. You train your mind to focus so you're not impulsive. This alters your brain. It decreases the activation in relation to fear and negativity. So it pulls your brain away from that cortisol system, And it also pulls it away from dopamine. So it pulls it away from impulsive pleasure and impulsive fear. Um, then you have energy to be creative and to discover things and not be defensive. And if you're afraid, you're not thinking of the future at all. You're thinking of the past, trying to find some comfortable, good old days, but unable to cope with the present and unable to envision a better future. But if you can settle yourself down and not be afraid, you can envision some way to be creative to make the world a better place. Also, practicing silence in the company of silent people, you understand you can connect with people at a spiritual level that's nonverbal. You don't have to talk all the time. You don't have to be busy all the time. This is the opposite of what social media and cell phones try to do to you. They really want to destroy your mind, destroy your spirituality. They're especially designed with the little buzzers and the blue lights to trigger fear. So, it is really a serious problem. A lot of research is done, as the CEO said, to go further and further into your brainstem to get your attention, and it destroys you. I mean, they know that. It's sort of takes my breath away that people would deliberately be so cruel. When people practice silence, okay, mindfulness practices have become routinely introduced into psychiatric and medical practice, and there's empirical evidence that it's working. Spend more time in nature. I like to do that. I like to step outside and get some exercise where I'm connecting with the natural world. But a lot of other people don't do it as exercise. They like to go hiking. They like to go bird watching. It's always good. You lose yourself in nature and you remember we are part of this. The culture keeps trying to pull us away from that. Because then when you can do that, you're slow to anger. You want to forgive. You don't want to judge because you don't want negativity. You want love. You find awe in nature. We have a natural response to natural beauty because that originally our survival was that we would be very curious about what's outside of us. But there is the curiosity for the sake of survival, and then there's just the curiosity because it's beautiful. We evolved in nature. We're naturally biophilic. We want to affiliate with other forms of life. And there are people who definitely identify with animals, and they tend to work on the Humane Society. They're really offended by people who harm animals. They become activists. Buddha, we are what we think. All that we are arises from our thoughts. And Marcus Aurelius, the things you think about determine the quality of your mind and the quality of your life. The problem is, there's a UNESCO, United Nations report 2023 that all over the world, there are adverse effects of digital technology, especially phones, social media. Kids all over the world are not doing as well in school, and there's more disruptions. It's unbelievable, right? We're talking about there's 8 billion people. How many billion of them have phones? And Mark Zuckerberg is just cleaning up like he's successful. We should admire him, or we have to call it out. And it is really threatening our future and our ability to change to a green energy future. Tech executives, the executives who create this stuff, don't let their kids anywhere near it. So even though Mark Zuckerberg is trying to figure out how to get 4-year-olds addicted to phones, I don't think he's going to let his own 2 little daughters get addicted to phones. Um, or maybe he doesn't after a year or so he realizes, oh, this is terrible. I got to get them off their phone. All right. So, but on the other hand, there's people in developing countries who are using AI to give every student a tutor. Well, then you wonder, okay, is that really registering in their brain? Are they really learning from an AI tutor? All right. So we're right in the middle of this sort of experiment of what's the relationship between technology and the brain? And how can we, link technology to sustainability and to educating the next generation so that they can lead in the future. So we're very much in the middle of that, and this class is just telling you your generation is in the middle of this, and I hope you will figure it out. Um, each one of you will have a different reaction to the class. You will have learned something different. But I hope your takeaway is that you find something you can take away with and really restructure your brain, restructure your life, or not restructure, but sort of maybe your upbringing was in this direction, but much more deliberate. And you're also able to go past just the habits you were born with and be much more deliberate about what you do. So it's very possible that students before they get to college really haven't had that many obstacles, but then life brings obstacles. So if you can think about this before you go out there and have life, experience life, you can self-correct and avoid overreacting. All right, so here's Mr. Haidt, the one about sugar. The search for happiness is one of the chief sources of unhappiness because usually people, when they're looking for happiness, they mean dopamine, and they really should look for contentment and just set long goals. And that's ultimately what makes you happy. Now, on Mr. Lustig view, it's the government is to blame because it doesn't regulate these addictive substances and because corporations pay their campaign costs. So my question is, who really is at fault here? The corporations or the politicians or both? Um, is it that dang government trying to tell me what to do? So, or is, people don't want to be told what to do, even if eating sugar is going to kill them and it's going to have them rot in a nursing home for decades before their bodies are ready to die. They don't, you know, it's just, do they know that? And then when they know it, can they control their impulses? They have to rehabituate themselves. Or do they want to? Or they just want to do what they want to do? The first step is actually knowing how much money is spent trying to get you addicted by people who do not care about you. Okay. Or I always hear students blaming the government. So what is this government that they're blaming? Is it I don't I don't want the government telling me what to do? Or is it that stupid government didn't regulate plastics and now my kid has endocrine cancer because of corporations, right? So sometimes people get mad at the government because it does try to regulate. Sometimes people get mad at the government because it didn't regulate. Sometimes they get mad at the healthcare system, Medicare, because it doesn't pay for something. Sometimes they get mad because they don't want to pay their Medicare taxes. Sometimes it's just really bizarre. the way I hear people, they're always blaming the government. What is the government? Sometimes corporations, when they give campaign money, and then the politicians that win, that are the puppets, they make laws that are not in the interest of people. So when people start suffering, who do you blame? Do you blame the lawgivers, or do you blame the corporations that made these politicians into their puppets? So I know some politicians that really are not puppets of the corporations, because they live in areas of the country that know that they don't want a politician whose campaign is paid for by corporations who want fossil fuels and who want minimal government. So there are good ones out there who are trying to redistribute income, trying to help maintain human health, trying to have a middle class. But the public really needs to distinguish between who really is acting in their interest and who's not. And that's very imprecise, and it changes quickly. So then the next thing is that when I was your age, I always blamed myself for eating poorly. And I beat up on myself a lot. But the food wasn't like it is now. The way, what's in the food and the way it's marketed and the billions of dollars spent appealing to your brainstem, I don't know, I'm more sympathetic toward more regulations than I used to be. But each of you will have to sort of sort it out in your head and think about big pharma, big sugar, big medicine, and how influential they are, and can we stand up to them? Is there any way to stand up to it through the laws? Or do we just have to try and hope for the best? Or can we form social networks? People come together. I have a few friends who are part of Overeaters Anonymous groups that they meet, just like Alcohol Anonymous. They admit that their eating is they can't control, and they get together and they talk together, they encourage each other. So there's that. So how much of it should be just personal initiative, social networks? How much of it should be related to the legal system? How much should try to get foods with sugar more expensive? And on and on. So what should we do? Here's the question. So, and so Mr. Lustig is saying these are activities. You have to perform them, including doing nothing, right? So organized religion is a community, shared meaning and purpose. He's saying the same thing Mr. Haidt said, the same thing Mr. Capra said. It's living for the sake of something greater than yourself. You have services, you have rituals, you have the arts, you reduce the fear of death, you separate reward, right, from contentment. So you're focusing on contentment when you go to church, not reward. So we are biologically engineered to need social support and emotional bonding. That's Aristotle. We're social and political by nature. And acts of compassion, generosity. Children thrive on empathy, and they really get wounded by violence. The mirror neurons, we imitate other people. Again, Aristotle, we learn by imitation and habit. We get validated for being empathetic, get support. So there's interpersonal synchronicity and empathic connection. It's really important. And if you do have all these communities with empathy, you have such a high quality of life. And it has very little to do with how much money you make. For example, in Indonesia, little kids sleep with their parents for the first 4 years. And that right? The kid grows up so incredibly secure, and they are secure, and they're very calm, and they don't fight. I was in a very, considered a poor neighborhood. The mothers and the kids are just sort of playing, being in a very calming way. And then, you get into the hyperactive kids put in daycare and everything's mechanized, and you got to make sure you got every class appropriate to the age of the kid. And I don't know. It just kind of, I think we should think twice about how we live and how to judge quality of life. So if you have autism, you're unable to exercise this synchronous behavior and generate empathy. Now, is autism genetic, or have we created a culture where the kind of wiring of a child, the way the culture wires kids when they're very little, leads to autism? It's probably some combination. But when mothers argue, or they treat their infant harshly, right? They shake them, they squeeze them, or they spank them. When the marital partners argue, the kid develops cortisol reactions from a young age. And it's very hard once you do that to develop solid, long-term friendships and relationships, because you're so used to not trusting the people around you, and you can't ever let your guard down. That would be really hard. So, obesity can spread within a group. People imitate, eat the same foods. 25% of human beings are on Facebook, but this isn't the same as in person. 40% loss of empathy in college students who possess a smartphone. This is serious, right? It's serious body chemistry that is not going to serve you well in your adult life. To have compassion, you have to have solitude. You have to have a sense of yourself separated from the internet. The most important achievement of childhood is turning solitude into personal and spiritual growth. You can enjoy being alone, and you can let your mind just freely roam. And you aren't anxious. You're just comfortable with yourself. And you can reflect. Well, kids do this. I mean, if they are having solitude, of course they're thinking about their friends or their parents. They're thinking about what they know, but they're thinking about it in a way that just makes them happy and makes them calm. They trust the people around them. I mean, it's amazing. And then you think about, what about a kid that's just afraid right from the beginning? My son taught some kids like that in the inner city of Chicago. It is really hard. They've really been wounded at a young age. Another way of solving the problem is contribute. So getting your self-worth associated with volunteering, generosity, philanthropy, having a job that you like, that gives you contentment. You transcend yourself. It matters more to others. Like you've dedicated yourself to something greater than yourself. It's challenging. It's difficult. You have peak experiences, sometimes really good, sometimes really bad. You can be reflective. You can see the role that the completed product will have on society. You're proud to have performed this. So teaching, of course, is always this kind of a job. If you're a teacher for the money, you're in trouble, because you will not be good at it, and the students will know and they'll act out. I mean, the administrators will know. I mean, you won't last, I don't think. being an administrator in a school, being a healthcare provider that doesn't feel like they've gotten caught up in a system they can't control, but rather is proactive and really connects with their patients and sends them home with a vision, giving the patients a vision of how they can have a better life. That would be very satisfying. But you can have the same job on a piece of paper, and you can be fulfilling your roles and doing something entirely different. One is you give a pill, you give some directions, you send them home. The other one is you give them a book or some thoughts or some handouts about how can you rethink your life to stay spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, you can have a healthy life overall. And then your physical health or your mental health will get a lot better. Altruism drives serotonin and contentment. So it's achievements that are contribute to a goal that's bigger than you. Moral decision-making is a process that governs thoughts of interdependence, egalitarianism. So this would be the person of practical wisdom, seeks out opportunities to weave people together, to make good decisions that are in the interest of people. So there are people who get reputations for when organizations fall apart. They go in there and they work with the people, get the people to talk to each other, and consulting at its best would enable people to move forward, solve problems. As opposed to competition, I don't depend on anybody else. That's a difference between rehabilitative justice and punitive justice. Somebody commits a crime, throw them in prison and throw away the key. Or how can you rehabilitate? How can you help them change their self-concept? Like you are a prisoner, but you don't have to be a bad guy the rest of your life. You can re-envision your life. You can break away from the violence. Where did the violence come from? Where is this from way back when you were a child? How do you break the cortisol system in your brain so that you don't act violently? How do you learn not only to control your anger, but to find something to live for that would make you happy so you don't get angry? So the notion of spite, that you wish others harm, it just makes people unhappy inside themselves. If you have, the aversion to harm, you can be too afraid of confronting people. And on the other hand, you can punish people, it's for your own sake, right? You have to be mean to people because that's what they need to shape up. Or I don't want to confront this person. I don't want to say anything, even though they need to reflect on their behavior. They need somebody to tell them, you're not coming across very well. When people don't get enough sleep, it makes it worse. They tend to not be able to have strength of mind. Volunteerism, emotional well-being. Adolescents are happier when they volunteer. Solving the problems, coping. You need to sleep, have mindfulness, and exercise. So your response to stress. If it's a chronic problem, it's really hard for you to become happy if you're in elder care and you're not going to get better. But sometimes people can take drugs that will lower their anxiety, but also lowers their reward. And so you try to reduce their fear, lower their cortisol levels. In toxic neighborhoods, it's really hard. People just are reacting to each other all the time. They're afraid of each other. So how do you deal with that? All these people cannot go to a different neighborhood. How do you teach mindfulness and help people help each other and create a better social network system in their neighborhoods? Sleep, not enough. A huge percentage of Americans don't get enough sleep. And then obesity makes it worse. And then when you're obese, you can't sleep. And then in order to feel better, you have to have some sugar. It's a spiral downward. The blue light from your phones, it prevents your body from creating melatonin that tells you to go to sleep, that relaxes you. So the blue light from your phone disrupts your sleep cycle. Multitasking reduces brain functioning. Anxiety about the future, as opposed to just focusing on body awareness, memory, transmission between both halves of the brain, executive function over your impulses and fears. Make a gratitude list, what you're grateful for. Focus on the present, the fullness of life right now. Then there's facts about belly fat and butt fat and how you get a metabolic disorder, what kinds of foods give you the wrong kind of fat. Exercise is good, but if you have an app for health and wellness, they don't work. It's just another fad. You just exercise because you need to, you want to. Another way to solve the problem is cooking. And then he talks about all the toxic food we eat, and it's really bad, and what sugar in your system does to your body. The proteins unravel, it damages cells. You age faster. I mean, it's unbelievable. It kills your liver cells, fructose, on and on. A lot of deaths, disability from diseases and mental illness, but these are tied to sugar. They tried feeding children glucose instead of fructose. It was amazing. 10 days, what the difference was. Okay, so these are all the different kinds of ways that what we put in our bodies and we call food is not food. So cooking your own food, sitting down with family and friends, that's the quality of life. And the epilogue, the ends, experiences make you happy. People make you happy. And you make yourself happy. Things do not make us happy unless it's what we do with those things. So the punchline here for this lecture is that we can bring in the insights of ancient wisdom and the knowledge and technology we gained from the modern world and synthesize them into a new kind of virtue ethics, a new kind of way of life that incorporates that ancient wisdom. And mostly that's about our brain stem. We can get control of our pleasures and fears and then move forward and create lives that are healthy, that are happy long-term, and that are sustainable. And we can more and more insist on having a economic system that is green energy based. We have to move toward that, do what we can to buy the products or eat the foods. Every time you spend money, you're rewarding some groups of people that sell you the thing, and you're punishing the ones who maybe are selling a higher quality, a more sustainable, or not going to Goodwill and just getting recycled stuff. So just be conscientious about how you spend your money. Are you part of the solution or part of the problem? And then take pleasure in that. Like, yeah, I want to do this. This is the way I want to live. This is a beautiful life. This is going to make me contented. All of college students are on the 50-year plan. And I should know because I'm 50 years older than you. I still have a plan. I have another 20-year plan. I haven't filled it all in yet, but I keep adding to it, or I know that, especially after this semester, I'll start creating ideas about what to do in addition to the connections I have. But that's the way to go in terms of flourishing. I've made plenty of mistakes. I could sit here and confess all my mistakes to you for the next hour, but that would probably get pretty boring. All I can say for myself is that, did I do the best I knew at the time? Was I doing what I thought would promote flourishing? And I just made a mistake. But then other times, I've had cortisol, I've had that chronic stress, and I have overreacted, and I have regretted it. And so I have tried to train myself out of cortisol reactions to things because they don't help people. I know how we are going to live in disruptive times, but I have to teach myself not to be afraid and not to try and get my students to be afraid, right? I mean, it is serious, but don't be afraid. It doesn't help. Just find a way to say, okay, I'm going to teach myself to take pleasure in living sustainably. And part of that is to take pleasure in being generous with other people and in realizing as the switch to green energy happens, we all have to have social networks where we feel energized by the switch and not threatened by the switch. And we have to overcome polarization because it's understandable because we live in such changing times. But somebody has to step up and lead. Somebody has to be looked up to as the person of practical wisdom, the one who is going to inspire everyone, the one who will bring people together, solve problems. And that's what you want to have a reputation for. And I hope for the best. And I hope Lion students can disproportionately have reputations for that. All right. The next section of the class is about the Greeks and Greek culture. So looking forward to that.